My name is Steven Alrich Kramer. I was born in Düsseldorf, a city in the Rhineland of Germany, November the 12th, 1926. He practiced that, and being a Jew after 1935, it was impossible for him to continue his profession. And as of that date, it was against the law. And the Germans were great observers of laws, and they were strict enforcers of the law. It was a criminal offense not to obey this edict. And as of that date, my father could not practice law in the partnership that he had worked in for, I guess, over 15 years at that time.
And so then what happened?
Well, at this time, I was about 7 or 8 years old, and I wasn't really involved in anything. I was just a young boy. I really didn't know what my parents were doing, but my parents decided to immigrate, and they had various choices. My mother had 2 brothers who were Zionists and who lived in Israel, went to Israel in 1932 and started to live there and reside there. She could move over to Israel. They actually took a trip to Israel, and they weren't too impressed with the standard of living and the conditions. At that time, Israel was still a very great backwater, underdeveloped from what it is today.
And they took this trip during the Nazi regime?
This was about 1935. They were gone for about a month or so.
They could see what was happening.
Well, I didn't know. They were just visiting relatives as far as we knew, but afterwards we knew that there was serious consideration of possibly moving to Israel. And they decided against that. Then there was also a consideration of moving to Brazil. There was a scheme present at that time in which a British corporation had obtained rights to a lot of land in a place called, what is it? Paraná, in a place called Paraná, where it was pretty rustic at the time. And the payment for the land was that the British corporation would build a railroad from Sao Paulo to someplace in Paraná, maybe a 400 or 500 kilometer railroad. And the British did do that, and they bought mostly their equipment, their railroad equipment, from Germany. And Germany at that time was doing a lot of bartering. So this British company had a possibility of obtaining marks to pay off some of the railroad equipment, which they would if somebody would like to buy, I think, 5,000 hectares at the time. These were the lots of land that they would sell. They would pay in marks. And that was one of the possibilities where this British company, the Germans were prevented from changing their money into stronger currencies at that time.
All Germans?
All Germans. And in fact, to emigrate or to leave Germany during that time, again, strict laws. Each person that left Germany on a permanent level would be able to take 25 marks in cash and 2 suitcases of personal belongings. And that was it. There was nothing else permitted.
And lose citizenship.
I beg your pardon?
And lose citizenship, right?
Not at the time of immigration. I don't know exactly the law. I don't think you lost citizenship right at the time of immigration, but I'm not sure. At a later time, I think in 1939, there was another edict at which time Jews who may have lived for generations in Germany were not considered German citizens anymore. Anyway, so at this time, in 1936, and I'll tell it to you from a child's viewpoint, my parents told us that all 3 of us, that's my brother, my sister, and myself, would go on a vacation to Italy. My God, that sounded like going on a vacation to Australia or to India.
Hawaii.
Or no, further than Hawaii. I mean, that was to the end of the world as far as I was concerned. And we went to this place. It was a sumptuous place. It was actually a very large villa in a small town called Recco, R-E-C-C-O, which was, I remember today very vividly, 17 kilometers south of Genoa on the coast of the Adriatic. No, was that the Adriatic Sea? Or
Yeah.
it's right next to Genoa. Anyway, it was a small town, fishing village, and there was this very nice villa on the foothills with maybe a garden mile long, a half a mile wide, very nicely vegetated. We used to play there, and a lot of rich people, their children stayed there for the summertime. We felt a little bit out of place. It was top rich people. But anyway, we were there.
Were you considered a rich family in Dusseldorf?
I'd say we were middle class, but upper middle class. We lived well. We had a house 3 stories high, usually 2 maids. And as far as I was concerned, we never wanted for anything. I had food and clothing and...
What did your dad do?
Pardon?
What did your father do?
He was a lawyer.
Oh, sorry.
I think we already covered it.
Let's keep going. You're in Recco, Italy.
Yes. Anyway, I'd never been to a place like this. The villa was a very sumptuous house. Nowadays, as I'm older, I can say it was typically Mediterranean, had a huge porch, with balustrades, and a view. In the distance, you could see a little bit of the ocean. And between the ocean and the villa was nothing but greenery. You didn't see the little town of Recco. Anyway, we had a lovely time, and that was the first time I also swam in the ocean, the Mediterranean Sea. I'd learned how to swim, and I could swim in a pool, but I'd never swum in moving water like you'd have in a sea. And that was rather strange, and I was kind of scared at first, but after a while I did all right, and I was doing very well in my swimming in the sea. That was one of the experiences we had. Anyway, to make a long story short, we also went on a railroad trip, first time in an overnight Pullman. Our mother brought us to Italy, and we left Düsseldorf, and there was an overnight trip, and then in the morning we were starting to climb into the Swiss Alps, and these were snow-covered mountains, which also was the first thing for me. It was fascinating. In those days, it took a day and a half to go from Düsseldorf to Italy. Nowadays, everything moves a lot faster. It doesn't take that long anymore. We were there about beginning of July, I'd say, and in August, my father came, and he was going to pick us up, and of course we all assumed we were going back to Germany. And he told us that no, we were not going back to Germany, that we were never going back to Germany, and that our mother was waiting for us in Holland. And this is from Italy to Holland. And he explained to us that he couldn't make a living and they wouldn't live in Germany anymore. What had happened, and this again I didn't know or realize at the moment, but my parents decided on a rather dangerous mission. From both sides of the family, there were fairly rich people, and my parents did have money through inheritance, and they decided to liquidate all of their assets, that is, take money from whatever money they had in the bank and sell our house that we lived in, and possibly exchange other items that they may have had. I don't know. But anyway, they amassed, at that time, approximately 100,000 marks, which was a fortune in those days. And they, through some connections, had found a captain of a little Rhine barge. There in Europe, you have a lot of traffic on rivers and canals, inland commerce using water. And this captain had a trip to go from Düsseldorf to Rotterdam. And he agreed for a commission to take the money that my mother gave him and give it back to her in Holland.
And how much are we talking about?
I beg your pardon?
How much are we talking about? Just a guess.
100,000 marks.
Which today would be what?
I don't have that, but it would probably like maybe $500,000, I'd say. It was a lot of money. And of course, my parents had no complete guarantee the guy would ever see him again. But as it were, everything worked out fine. And to smuggle German currency out of the country, it was illegal to take German currency out of the country, and it certainly was illegal to smuggle it out. And had they been caught, either the captain of the ship or my parents for doing it, they would have been arrested and sent to concentration camps. So in hindsight, that was the reason that we were out of the country to start with at the in this so-called vacation, and had anything happened to them, they would have my uncles in Israel would have taken us and kept us and probably raised us in Israel.
So it was a pretty elaborate plan, your parents.
It was very dangerous because they were doing something that was completely against the law and strictly enforced, especially where it would be concerning Jews.
And I mean, there was a lot of planning, a lot of thought that went into it.
Oh, yes, yes. They also decided not to immigrate to Brazil because it was rustic farming, unimproved land that they had to clear and then plant coffee. And my father didn't know zilch about working land and supervising a ranch, and he thought that was far from what he could do.
His partner ended up taking that offer?
Some people that they knew took that offer, yes, and they moved to Brazil.
Good. So when you think about the day when your father came to Recco and told you you weren't going back to Germany ever, do you remember the feeling at that moment?
Well, I was flabbergasted because that was the first time I ever heard any inkling or thinking that my parents had that seriously they were considering leaving Germany.
And so what did you say to your father?
Well, I mean, he said, we're going, and of course, that was something I had to accept, but I think I didn't like it at the time. Sure, I was flabbergasted.
And tell me who you were with and how they felt about it. You're with your brother and your sister.
My brother, I don't remember what he did. He didn't say too much, I don't think. Or maybe he didn't tell me what he thought. My sister, I don't know. She was with the girls, and we didn't see too much of her during this time.
And so just to fill in, tell me who you went to this vacation with, your brother and your sister, and how old were they?
I was 7, I was 7 at the time, and my brother would have been 10, and my sister would have been 12, I'd say.
And what were their names?
Henry was my brother, and Doris was my sister.
All right.
And both of them at this present time have passed beyond.
And so you get to Rotterdam, right?
Well, no, it was a little bit more complicated. My parents had some friends who lived in Scheveningen. Scheveningen is a small town, very elegant, just outside of The Hague. Now, Holland's such a small country, you know, to us you can almost spit from one town to the next. But there, we stayed with these people in Holland for about 3 or 4 weeks. And then we went to Antwerp with my mother. And in Antwerp, we applied, or at least I remember we had an examination at the American consulate in Antwerp. And I guess that's where we got the visas. My parents were able, because of the money that they smuggled out, they were able to qualify for a, what do you call it, a rich man's visa where you invest. You're coming as an investor and you're going to employ people in the United States. It's a different category of visa.
And did Jews ever have a refugee status?
No,
during the war?
We were not refugees.
No, I'm saying, did the U.S. government
Oh,
ever
during the war, I was still in high school when it started, and during the war, we were enemy aliens, quote unquote.
Okay, we'll get to that. But I'm just wondering, at the time that your parents got the visa, the U.S. hadn't made any gestures to take in Jews as refugees?
No. This was just the start of Hitler. Hitler needed 3-4 years to consolidate his power over the German government. It took him 3 or 4 years until he really was able to ram through whatever he wanted.
Okay, so outside the investment category, there were very few categories that, as Jews escaping Hitler, they could have got a visa.
Not at that time, no.
Okay. Well, tell me that for the camera. So what, other than that category, what other categories would have been available to them?
We came, well, anyway, from Antwerp, where we stayed about 2 months. We then went to Paris for 3-4 days before we met the boat or the ship that we crossed the Atlantic on, which happened to be the SS Berengaria of the Cunard steamship line. And the history of the SS Berengaria was that it was the first ship the Germans named Europa, and that was one of the ships that the English obtained as an indemnization from World War I. A little anecdote. Anyway, we arrived in New York on my brother's birthday, which was December the 10th, 1936. And my father, who had preceded us by about a month or so, met us at the boat, at the ship. And I think the first night we stayed someplace in Manhattan, probably a hotel. I don't remember that much.
What was the reunion like when you got off the boat?
I beg your pardon?
What was the reunion like when you got off the boat?
Well, we embraced. It was, my parents were never effusive like Latin people making a big hup-de-doo about it, but
Very reserved.
yeah, reserved, but it was, glad to see us, and everything was going along.
So your parents, your family were very classic, stern, reserved German.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Oh,
Just give me a characterization so I can use it.
well,
What were your parents like? What was the sort of energy, the dynamic?
my father was very reserved, but he was a very warm person. He was raised in a strict German fashion, where the father was a representative of the Kaiser. He was the head of the family. And in the real strict German houses at that time, my father's time, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if the children stood at attention, like military attention.
Like in Sound of Music. Like the Sound of Music. With
I
Julie
don't know.
Andrews. Remember the Sound of Music?
No, I don't right now, no.
Remember they were in Austria,
Oh.
and it was the colonel, and he would blow a whistle for each
Oh,
of the kids.
well, yeah, that wouldn't be a bit out of place. Right. And in fact, my father...
The Von Trapp family.
In fact, my father used to say, as he didn't understand the young people nowadays, that in his days you never never talked back to the father. If the father said jump off the roof, you would jump off the roof. And then you would tell him, Father, I broke both legs. That was a good way to do it.
Let me get you to stop tapping because it comes out on the mic.
All right.
Okay. So, so back to the landing of the boat. You're at the dock and you're finding each other again, right?
Yes, well, it's just like they show in the movies. There's maybe 2,000-3,000 people below, and you walk and you get into a dock. It's a roof-colored. It's covered by a roof, and you have to go, I guess, through cordons of immigration and police or whatever, and finally you're let go.
No Ellis Island at that time. That was
No. We went from. We met the immigration office or customs office, whatever, on the boat while it was anchored midstream, and he examined, I guess, the people that were coming to the United States. Since I was a child, I didn't really present any of the documents or anything. And we passed muster, everything was in order. And then we were cleared to land and to get in the United States.
So I'm just wondering one little detail. Now that, if you think back on it as an adult, because your parents went to such elaborate and very detailed and very risky planning to pull this whole thing off, that landing on the dock in New York would have been the culmination of this grand plan. Did you feel that? Did you feel that they were relieved and they made it?
I didn't even know the gravity of the situation, really. It really hadn't entered. At that time, I just became 8 years of age. So it just didn't register, and it certainly, you're looking at this as though you were producing a movie, you know. That's my impression. And I don't think there was that kind of a euphoric relief at having passed the last hurdle. I think it was a foregone conclusion that once they got aboard the ship, and they had a visa in their hand, barring the ship hitting an iceberg coming over to the United States, that everything was okay.
Okay. But well, I can think of some things. If I were in my grandfather's place, I would have been thinking on the boat, I hope a German vessel doesn't pull alongside and start checking people.
Well, they couldn't do that.
Get us back with our money, because they'd be after us. Once they found out we took the money out of the bank and sold a house, we'd be wanted people.
How could they do that on go alongside a British ship, merchant ship, with a German warship that's a declaration of war? Germany had just lost a big war.
Yeah, or anything. Let me stop for a second. Okay. So you ended up finishing high school, going into the army, and ended up.
No, I went from the from high school. I went to the University of California in Berkeley. I was 16 and a half, I think, and I was there for a year. And
let me ask you, finished early. You finished
yes, I finished early.
How did that happen?
My mother in Germany put us into school 1 year early, my brother and myself. And I guess we stuck all the way through. I was going to say I was 16 and a half, and from 16 and a half to 17 and a half, I studied at Berkeley. And I remember I had to take bonehead English, which means that you didn't have enough credits or you weren't good enough in the grammar, which was true in English, and you had to perfect your English to be able to write better. There was a program, this was when the war was on, and there was a program where you could join the Army at 17 and a half, and they would send you to college for at least 6 months until you're 18. And that's what I did. And I was, for 6 months, I was in the Army. And then as soon as I became 18, I went into basic training and trained in the infantry. I was involved in a howitzer battalion, which is helps the infantry with short-barreled howitzer guns. And we trained into that. And in fact, after I started basic training, the last German serious attempt at lousing up the Allied lines came in the winter, when the Germans tried to make a push through the American and British lines where they met more or less, and try to drive a wedge through to the North Sea, through Belgium. And that was the Battle of Bastogne. And I remember when we came to Camp Roberts, they had cleaned out the last 2 or 3 or 4 classes before they were supposed to graduate, and shipped the whole shebang to Germany to fill in the gaps of the troops. Didn't hit us. So we graduated, and from there I went to Fort Benning and officers training, and I didn't make it. And from there I went to Camp Polk in Louisiana, and from there I was sent to Germany. And in Germany, because I spoke German, I was attached to a counterintelligence corps where we interviewed applicants for German applicants for work at the Landsberg military base, which was in Bavaria. That time we lived in Bavaria.
And what did you interview them for?
I beg your pardon?
What were you interviewing for?
Interviewing?
Yeah, what were you interviewing?
Well, we would interview in German the people that were applying for jobs at a military base. In those days, most of the secondary jobs were done by Germans. They hired them, and hired them at, compared to American dollars, they hired them at very low wages. And they wanted to screen them to make sure that they didn't have any Nazi background.
What were some of the questions you would ask?
I don't remember now, or just general questions.
Like, what was the tone? Have you or have you ever been?
Yes, yes, yes. And for years, this and that. Did you? Were you a member of the National Socialist Party, and so and so? Were any of your family members involved, and so on?
So when you're back in Germany, you're pretty conscious. I mean, you already have 6 months of college, of university. You're very conscious of what the Nazis did, final solution, concentration camps, and it's fresh, right?
No, I must say that I was aware that they had done, but not to the scope of the final solution. And part of the blame is that that was not very much talked about in the United States. It was rather suppressed. Certainly there were people that knew about it, and certainly the Nuremberg trials brought a lot of this out, but it wasn't disseminated in the United States very broadly.
Why is that?
Why? I don't know. That's not my opinion to know. All I know is I didn't know until the Eichmann trials that were held in Jerusalem that condemned him finally. They in great detail covered his crimes, which was basically he was in charge of shipping Jews to feed the furnaces at Auschwitz.
And what year was that?
What year that he brought to trial? I'd say somewhere around 1950 or 52, somewhere in that. I'm not sure of it.
So when you got to Germany to translate, was there any kind of ill feeling, or was there any kind of, what was your feeling when you sit down with these?
No, I again, I didn't get close to Germans, but I certainly had dealings with Germans, and I just treated them rather impersonal.
Did they seem foreign to you?
I beg your pardon?
Did they seem foreign?
Yes, yes, I would say I knew where they came from, but I didn't like the German way. Actually, when you're in the army, you were pretty much stayed among your people, army people, and we didn't. The Germans in those days, right after the war, had quite a bit of economic problems. They finally were feeling the effects of the war. They had strict rationing. They had, all of their major cities were bombed out in the center, and
A beaten people.
a beaten people. Right, right.
And so did you feel any animosity from them? Did they know you were Jewish?
They may have, I don't know, but no one ever said anything outwardly to me. And I don't think most of the Germans had this hatred for the Jews that the Nazis stirred up.
That was mostly it was a political thing.
Yes, yes. Part of the Nazi dogma that developed by Hitler was that maybe 75–80% of all the woes that befell Germany before and during and after World War I were due to the international conspiracy of the Jews against the Christians, according to his beliefs.
Okay. There was a gentleman who came to visit us once from Germany who you had met while you were there, and we had lunch with him. I forgot his name.
Oh, Bernhard Wirtz.
Tell me about Bernhard Wirtz.
Bernhard is the son of my father's partner, who's Wirtz. I don't know his first name, Dr. Wirtz, and of the lawyer's office in which he worked in Düsseldorf. And he was the only, all the other partners were Jewish. And he was the only non-Jew who had this, who was part of this legal lawyers partnership. And as of a result of the laws that were enacted by Hitler, as of the 1st of January 1936, he became the sole owner of the law firm, and he kept it, and he did all right. And his son, Bernhard, also joined the law firm once he was, he graduated with a law degree. And as after the war, their law firm grew, where they had several offices, one at one time in New York and one, of course, in Berlin. Anyway, when he retired, he had about 80 or 90 lawyers working for his law firm. I don't know the nitty details, but I'm sure that he's a he has a little nest egg, I would say.
Did all right for himself.
He did very well for himself.
Good. And so.
And I met him in Germany while I was in Bavaria, because through my parents, I contacted them. They were living on a farm that they owned in Bavaria. This was at the time when Germany was very bad and food was very scarce. So since they had a 30-hectare farm, which is rather a huge farm in Europe, 30 hectares, and if you're that close to the earth, to the land, and you have chickens, you have cows, and you have this pigs and this and that, it's pretty hard to starve. And that's why they lived on the farm. They didn't farm, but they lived on the farm.
And your parents sent you to him because of that? They wanted to make
They
sure
didn't
you were
send
okay?
me. They said that these people, they were in communication with them, writing, and I was in Germany, and they sent me a letter saying where they were, and so I contacted them, and I went there for a weekend one time and visited them on the farm.
So you were about 18 and Bernard was about 18?
I think Bernard's about 2 years younger than I am. I think I was 19 at the time or so.
And what was that meeting like?
Well, we got along pretty nicely. In fact, crazy as we were, the famous raincoats that people wear in Germany, which are rubber or rubber coated at the time, were called Klepperwerke. And the factory was very close to where their farm was. And during the war, instead of making raincoats, they made life-saving inflatable boats for aircraft. If they get down over the ocean, the pilot could jump into that. So us having cigarettes, or I having cigarettes, he said, well, we can probably buy those for 1 or 2 sticks of cigarettes. Packets, not packages, what do you call them? Package of 10? Cartons, yeah. 1 or 2 cartons a boat. So I don't remember how it was, but we, with just cigarettes, we bought 2 of those lifeboats. 1 for him and 1 for me.
And what'd you do?
I played with it here in the United States and gave it away or something. And he had his in Germany, and he told me one time he went to Bonn in the train and inflated his boat and floated back down to Düsseldorf on the Rhine. one of his big trips. Took him a day or two or something like that.
So, you would think, going back to Germany after all that you and your family had gone through, you'd be Nazi hungry and have a huge chip on your shoulder and looking at Germans.
Not a chip, not a huge chip. I think you're. I was distant. Like if you go among a crowd and you say hello to someone, you don't know them from Adam. You don't invite them to your house or anything like that. That's the way I felt, but not chip on my shoulders.
You weren't looking at all these Germans who had killed millions of Jews and that kind of thing.
No. And in fact, it wasn't many Germans that killed. It was very specialized forces that were trained, especially like guard dogs. They were trained to bite and bite for the jugular vein.
So when you got to Germany, would you consider yourself at that time completely assimilated and you felt more American than anything else?
Yes, America was my only country. Yeah.
So tell me that feeling. How did you identify yourself when you stepped on German soil again?
No different. I was in U.S. Army, U.S. Army unit. I didn't feel German. I could speak German and I could understand. That was different. I didn't feel like it was in a foreign country, but didn't make me German. It's just like if I crossed the border and went to Tijuana, I can converse in Spanish, but that doesn't make me want to be or even feel like I'm a Mexican.
It was that kind of distance. It was that kind of distance.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this now, coming a generation away. Let me not leave Germany yet. Was there anything, while you're in Germany, after the war, you're during this really dire period of reconstruction and people, like we said, beaten. Did you feel any of that? What was your impression of Germany?
Well, the cities where the life was the hardest. But when we were in Bavaria, we were in a very picturesque area that was never hurt by the war, surrounded by nature, and in fact it was fairly well-to-do. It was around a lake, and very nice houses and small villages that were well built up. So once we were in Bavaria, we didn't have this dire thing. And the people were a little bit more, they were better to do. They didn't feel the harshness of that because they also were close to the land where the pigs were raised and the cows gave milk and the chicken laid eggs and what have you. So it was closer.
So now let me ask you maybe a little bit of a complicated question. So you go forward a generation after all that you've been through and your family has been through and the distance you have from Germany, you find yourself through a constitutional amendment that you have your son and daughter and grandchildren who are now German citizens.
Well,
and how does that strike you?
It doesn't strike me. It doesn't give me any feelings. I feel that that they did what they wanted to do by their choice. I, by my choice, never pursued German citizenship, and I would probably have more of a pecking order right, you might say, by applying for it, but I didn't would not want to be German nor take advantage of anything that Germany could offer me, such as they have a very generous retirement benefits, even if you've never worked in Germany. But I wouldn't want to take any of those advantages.
Why is that?
Because I just think it's immoral. I feel that I left Germany, I don't want anything to do with her, and just let it go at that.
Okay. And no, for our generation and the grandkids, doesn't have any conflict?
I feel that my children, I've done what I could to raise them, and they're beyond my power to raise or influence them. And so if they decide that they want to do this, for whatever reason they have, go ahead, do it.
Is there just a tinge of immorality or hypocrisy in it?
They are removed from my emotions by one generation. And they have, I would say they probably don't have the emotional feelings that I do.
Is that a good thing?
I don't know if it's good or not, but that's what I believe.
I mean, is it good that we and the grandkids are...
I believe in letting everyone do what they want to do, unless it harms the general humanity. I would object to that, but if they want to become Germans, fine. If they feel that the advantages are for them, so be it.
Okay. And now we got to backtrack. We got to set this up because nobody knows what the hell we're talking about. So tell me, what happened that allowed your son, daughter, and grandchildren to become German citizens?
The new Constitution, which was passed by the Germans after World War II, had a clause in it that the people that were denied German citizenship because of a racial background could reclaim it, as well as their descendants, or something like that. I may not quote it exactly,